This is the Blueprint Podcast, bringing you the latest in cyber defense and security operations from top Blue Team leaders. Blueprint is brought to you by the SANS Institute and is hosted by SANS Senior Instructor John Hubbard. And now, here's your host, John Hubbard.
On this episode of Blueprint, we continue discussing the details of what it takes to secure a macOS environment, but this time from a slightly different angle. We're covering enterprise macOS management. Joining me on the podcast today, we're going to have Jaron Bradley, the detection lead from Jamf Threat Labs, who continues to help bring into focus the capabilities, tools, and data required to secure enterprise-managed macOS devices. We talk about built-in and third-party tools required to see what's happening across your macOS assets, and tips for threat hunters to help spot and stop targeted attacks against enterprise macOS. Stick around for another super fun conversation on this episode of Blueprint. On this season of Blueprint, listeners may have noticed I'm trying to peek more into the corners of InfoSec that we haven't really explored as much on the previous seasons. And earlier in the season, we had a couple episodes on insider threat and ICS and supply chain defense and slightly more specialized topic episodes. And macOS is one of those things that it's not the most common operating system in most corporations, but something that may have been considered niche in the past. I would say it is not that way anymore. We're seeing more and more Macs being picked up. And with that, I'm getting lots of questions from students in class and otherwise, and always seeing more thirst for knowledge on macOS information. And so for that reason, I kind of jumped into the season knowing that that would be something people want to have as much of as they can get to. So I lined up not one, but two of the most awesome macOS specialists that I could find. One of them being Kat Suff, who was on a previous episode this season. And today we have the second of those interviews. So today on the show, we have Jaron Bradley. And Jaron currently works as the macOS detections lead at Jamf Threat Labs. And for those who might not be familiar with Jamf, they're one of the biggest Apple kind of enterprise management solutions that's out there. So I'm sure Jaron has seen some things. Also, if my research is correct, macOS focused security blog, a lot of conference talks, wrote a whole book on Mac incident response, runs a threat hunting course on macOS. So definitely a uniquely positioned expert in the field. So with that, welcome to the podcast, Jaron. Thank you so much for being with us.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Excited to be here.
So in your bio, I noticed you mentioned you've done many of the typical cyber defense activities in the past, which, incident response and threat hunting and detection engineering. And I'm assuming some of that was probably, at least at first, maybe in a general Windows environment. But you had mentioned you became interested in kind of the more niche topics, right? At least at the time. Interested in getting a little bit of background of what led you into the world of kind of Apple and macOS detections and focusing on something that may be a little more difficult than the average cyber defense.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of it is what you just mentioned is actually pretty accurate. So like going into a company and working in incident response, my first job out of college actually dealt with a lot of APT-based attacks. And one day, my boss kind of came in and said, like, here's a Mac. I don't know. What do you do with this thing? And a lot of people kind of had that question as well when it came to incident response. And the more we kind of looked into it and kind of asked around, I figured nobody really knows the answer to this. So that piqued some interest there. I had a big, I'd gone out of my way in college to pursue some like Unix administration certificates just because I don't know. I had a blast with Linux. I thought Linux was a lot of fun. And that just kind of, slowly I learned like, oh, like this Mac OS thing, like this doesn't feel all that, unfamiliar. Like when you start to play with it a bit, open the terminal and plug in some commands, you're like, hey, this translates really nicely. And then, you start learning more, you start learning it's built on top of BSD, or at least a portion of it is. And I don't know, there's just kind of ended up running with it. I joined a threat hunting team kind of shortly after that and found the same questions were occurring. Well, we have Mac data. What do we do with this? And nobody at the time was quite willing to take that and run with it, just because it was so niche. Like it's they're in the environment, everyone's using them, but but they're not where currently all the attacks were occurring. There's limited data that everyone wants to handle the big quote unquote sexy attacks on Windows that are these mass scale attacks, and then like something shows up weird on a Mac and everyone's like, nope, I'm not touching that. So I kind of wanted to take that on, and I wanted to play with that, and that's kind of really out of curiosity and like just my interest in being in kind of a niche space that kind of led to what is now kind of only looking at Macs. So
I assume you're a big fan of a challenge, right? It sounds like back
I
then,
am.
when you're handed the here's this, no one understands it, figure it out, right? That's a big task to take on.
Yeah, and I think in cyber I think it's pretty fun to kind of find a spot where you can excel and just dedicate some craft to that. And I had fun doing that. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of people in InfoSec love problem solving, and this is certainly one space where there's plenty of problem solving to be done. Yeah, so how would you frame, like, if someone was like, okay, I want to bring Macs into my environment, is this something that's going to be overly complex to still figure out, or have we evolved to a place where these are much more kind of understood, and the tools are there, and the tools are mature, and we have kind of maybe equal or slightly close to equal visibility as we would with like a traditional maybe Windows environment?
Yeah, absolutely. When it comes to getting devices into the corporate world, like there's always been difficulties with that. Not so much anymore, but like initially, like a Mac, it was built for a personal user, right? It's not built for your standard like corporate computer. It was built for artists. It was built for designers, whatever. Like these were computers that were meant to be used essentially by one person or maybe one family. So that's one of the things working at Jamf, like one of the goals, like the early goals of Jamf, like you say, most people know it for like Jamf admins, right? They're there to Jamf is here to help organizations succeed with Apple and get Apple computers into the corporate environment. So a lot of focus has come around that and trying to make sure like, oh, well, hey, like people want to use these really cool computers inside corporate networks. It's not just CEOs anymore that have the one special computer, right? People are becoming very familiar with them and want to use them. So I think that's helped a lot of things for Apple too, I would argue. But I don't think it's not impossible anymore for your everyday user, whoever they be, to show up to work with an Apple computer anymore, which is great.
And so do you see the way, let's say, a Mac, comes out of the box, right? Windows has, the ability to join a domain, collect logs, push out policies, and all of that. With Apple being kind of, as you said, at least initially designed as a personal device, is that where third-party tools like Jamf and anything else kind of like it comes in? Is that something that you would say, if a corporation is going to bring in Macs, is going to be kind of a necessity to get the type of visibility they would need to provide a quality cyber defense?
Yeah, I think Apple's making some changes here too, small adjustments. I would still argue their focus is on the user experience, like the single user experience. But they are making some adjustments here and there to try and make that easier. But yeah, I would say right now it's third-party tools. Like you open your computer and right off the bat, like you're able to do all this like with third-party tooling and working with Apple, you're able to kind of open your computer and boom, like get set up with this third-party management software of some type, right? So, and again, that's what's making it easier to get kind of into the corporate world with your Apple device. So,
yeah. So if someone is ready to take that on, right? They're like, cool, we'll use third-party tools to manage and kind of gather our security data. We're going to bring in Macs. In your view, and I know we kind of talked with Kat about this, but I always love hearing from kind of all the experts that are out there. What would you say is the threat level for a company? Like, should they assume that they're going to be probably more safe than their Windows devices, or what kind of exposure do you see for, Mac fleets?
I think probably safe is a is a pretty good like way to put it. And the thing is though, I don't believe that's because the Mac is inherently safer than Windows. Um, like uh, Macs do have a lot of great security features, but they suffer from a lot of the same, exact problems. Like there's going to be hackers out there. Bypasses have been found for a lot of these security features that are supposed to be keeping us safe. Apple does patch those things, just like would happen on a Windows computer. Those things get patched. Hackers sometimes find new ways. So however, I think you find yourself more safe on a Mac and feeling more safe on a Mac right now, primarily because of the market share. Right, Windows is still running the show in terms of the market share and how many computer at these big companies, how many Macs are you going to find versus Windows machines, right? Like that number is shifting and it's going up. But if I'm an attacker and I can target 90% of a company, or I can target 10%, like I'm going to go after that 90% to get, whatever I'm going after, most likely. So honestly, I think a lot of what's keeping Mac users safe does often come down to the market share. If you look way back to like some of the earliest APT attacks, even, right? One of my a book I really enjoy is The Cuckoo's Egg by Cliff Stoll. Not sure if you've read it or not, but to my knowledge, if I recall correctly, like the earliest kind of documented, APT attack, right? And what did they go after? Well, they went after what the biggest market share was, or at least where all the good research was, which was on Unix-based systems. And the attackers did the same exact thing. They came in, they moved around the network from system to system over SSH. They used exploits to gain privilege escalation. Like these are all the same steps you take on a Windows computer. You're just doing it on whatever computers are necessary to get access to the good information. So if I have a 90% chance that good information is going to be on a Windows system, that's probably what I'm going to target. And I'll take my chances that I don't have to spend a ton of time building out a whole lot of tooling for the other 10%. So all that to say, the market share, I think, is what makes a big difference in some of what these attackers are going for. But that is not to say Macs don't get attacked, because they definitely do.
Yeah. One of the ways that we like to talk about assessing threat levels, right, is what is a threat, right? Capability, opportunity, and intent to do harm is kind of one of the definitions that we use in various SANS courses. And, from what you said there, right, obviously there's capability and there's intent, but maybe it's not as high as the Windows kind of area in terms of, there are people going for where they're going to get the most bang for their buck. But the opportunity factor is one thing I wanted to ask you about, especially with you being in your position at Jamf. With a Mac environment, really any environment, one of the big questions is what kind of speed to patching and solving, problems that do pop up. How fast can you go from it's vulnerable to it's not vulnerable? In Windows, we know we have this cadence of Patch Tuesday and things like that. But how would you compare the ability to go from it's vulnerable to, all right, all the devices are fixed, we were updated, we have a new operating system installed? Is that significantly different on the Mac, in your opinion?
So there's been a lot of buzz over the past, 3 years. I don't know. I can't recall exactly how long it's been, but there's been a lot of buzz over the Apple bug bounty program, which has not been in existence forever. People have been asking for it forever. And it's kind of come about fairly recently, at least considering this is a very big company that wasn't originally offering a bug bounty program. And there's been a lot of comments and a lot of security researchers commenting on that bug bounty program and how Apple's been to work with. You can read a lot of that online. I won't get into a ton of that, but what I will say is that when it comes to patching bugs, reporting vulnerabilities, like at least in the ones that we've dealt with, Apple has acted very quickly. Like, I don't know that there's a specific, like Patch Tuesday type approach for Apple, but I will say, like, we find vulnerabilities, we report them, and then, very shortly after, we generally get some type of email that says, like, we believe this issue to be patched. Could you please try, in the latest beta, which if you're an Apple developer, actually almost anybody can get access to the betas. You download it, install it, and give it a try. And yeah, like, Apple is pretty quick to patch these things that get reported to them, I would argue.
From the point that they make that patch available, that's one thing, and that's awesome that they act very quickly. Is it something that you see customers who, have Jamf or otherwise, right? Is it something that customers are looking at that patch and saying, okay, it's probably safe to just throw it on the machine, or are we still being extra careful and rolling things out, piece by piece, kind of mitigating risk along the way? Or is there any kind of significant difference in, like, yeah, when they release something, we generally trust it's going to work and just go?
Yeah, that's a good question.
I don't know if you have any data on that.
I don't have any data on that. That is one big thing that we've seen for some other security vendors and security vendors in general is, like, especially as Apple has continued to kind of kick people out of the kernel, right? Mm-hmm. That's been going on for a while, and providing visibility in different ways. Some of these companies that are still in the kernel, like, and some of these companies that are running software that's running in the kernel are afraid to patch anything. Like, they're like, we're running XYZ, it's in the kernel. As soon as something changes, like, all these Macs are no longer, like, they're just going to stop working. And that, to be fair, has happened. I think as frustrating as sometimes it can be to no longer be in the kernel, especially from a security product sort of perspective, it does solve this kind of issue you're referring to, where people are afraid to go to the latest update because how much stuff am I going to break? I think a lot of that has been solved, and people feel a lot more comfortable on a Mac, like, just going to, hey, there's a new update out. Yep, install that. Let's go. But I don't have the hard numbers on that, but that is the vibe I've gotten from a lot of people, like, as we continue to get, less and less access to the kernel. So.
Yeah. I definitely wanted to dive into some of that kind of stuff as well. Real quick before we get there, operating system versions. Do you have any insight or kind of at least gut feel on when there's an organization that's running Macs? Are they staying on the very newest version of macOS, or are they kind of holding back, like a lot of Windows, probably still have Windows 10 and maybe Windows 7 and, God forbid, XP, out there still kind of lingering around, causing potential issues? People updating Macs operating systems faster? Do you know?
I don't know the answer to that. At least not like a solid in terms of like companies specifically. Are they how quickly are they updating? I don't know the exact numbers on that. I know that I tend to, like, when something comes out, like, me and probably my team, like, we're some of the first ones on it. We're like, yeah, like, let's get all the new stuff, and mm-hmm. I think generally do so without any repercussions. But again, that's just us. I don't know in terms of other corporations or anything.
Sure. So you mentioned some of the new things that are happening in macOS security in terms of kicking people out of the kernel and all of that. With a lot of security software running at a very privileged level in Windows and otherwise, and Mac's not letting you do that in increasing kind of fashion, what is it that you're doing to harness the data from Macs? Like, what have they changed that allow you to still kind of get that visibility without, getting into those kind of threats of having to run kernel level code?
Yeah. So we just myself and a coworker of mine, Matt Benyo, just did a Black Hat talk on this topic, at least to an extent, where we talk about how we're leveraging the Apple endpoint security framework to get access to these security events, or at least Jamf is. And basically, like, that was kind of what we'll call, Apple's peace offering for kicking everyone out of the kernel. We have all these security providers that, like, hey, if we're not in the kernel, like, we don't have a product, right? Like for security, like
Right.
you need visibility. For visibility, you generally had to be in the kernel. So, but Apple has kind of built this new feature over the past couple of years called security extensions, or sorry, system extensions, which has allowed uh, using a system extension, you can kind of communicate with the endpoint security framework, which Apple has built to provide visibility into the different events occurring on the system. So before, you wanted to see when a new process is created, you wanted to see when certain syscalls are being made for files, right? You want to see when a file is created, when a file, is modified in some way. And maybe you didn't have to be in the kernel for all these things, but for it certainly made it easier when you wanted to get kind of hack your own way into different event sources, right? So Apple has actually done a really good job at providing this type of visibility from user space using this new system extension kind of feature. So you pick using ESF, you pick the events you want to subscribe to. You want to say, like, show me every time a process is created, show me every time a file is created, a file is modified, whatever it be. And you're now subscribed to those events. You're in user land, so you're no longer in the kernel. If you have a bug in your code, you're no longer crashing the entire operating system. You're just crashing your system extension, which then reboots and reconnects. It definitely goes very hand in hand with kind of Apple's approach that's been going on since the early days of Apple, right? Everything runs as a daemon. You can write an app to connect to daemons. You can write a command line tool to connect to daemons. Like, there's a lot of separation when it comes to the operating system and in terms of how it's running. There's just a lot of different processes doing a lot of different things. And Apple has multiple ways of inter-process communication to kind of communicate with these daemons. And this setup that they've now have going with this system extension approach complements that very nicely.
Yeah, so we've kind of gone from this world where you're kind of in the middle, right, of these messages or things happening and trying to intercept them and maybe change or modify or stop them, to now Apple's just saying, like, we're just going to tell you what's happening, and then you can kind of decide what you want to do based on that. I looked through your Black Hat presentation. There was some really cool stuff in there, and one of the things you had called out, I believe it was in that presentation, was the difference between was it authorization and notification events. Was that was that presentation, right?
Yes, it was. Yep.
And so that's kind of the way of separating the kernel, maybe saying, hey, here's what I'm doing and you can't do anything about it, versus here's a thing that I'm doing. Do you want to allow it? Is that the correct characterization of the kind of control you have?
Yeah. So instead of kind of being reactive, at least not for every single type of event, but for the majority of events, you can either say, hey, let me know when this event occurs. I'm going to perform some type of logic, and then I'll let you know if it should be allowed to continue. That's kind of one type of event. The other type would be just a notify, which says, hey, let me know when this type of event occurs. Carry on per normal. I don't need any chance to respond, but it gives you the option, right? You can either do these authorization events, as it were, which allow you to make those decisions, or notify events. And instead of having to only look at these events, perform some type of scans, and then maybe go kill something that you realize you don't want running, you can just stop it from running altogether based on your own criteria in these system extensions. So, yeah.
Yeah, so that's kind of what the Jamf, protect agent or whatever it is going to be doing, right? Is kind of recording those events and then looking for anything questionable going on. And your presentation was a lot about some of the things that you might be looking for as a threat hunter, or just as the agent, that can immediately take action to say, like, hey, this is bad.
Definitely, yeah. So we got to do a lot of talking on some of the detections we've had good luck with and found malware with, as well as, and a lot of those are behavioral based, right? Like, we're looking for events occurring on the system. And in theory, we've that using those behavioral detections, you can catch malware that hasn't even been caught before, as we're the old AV approach. Like, it's great and it works and it's very reliable, low false positive ratios, all that. But someone out there has to get hit with this malware before you know it exists, right? And with some of the stuff we're able to do using the events happening on the system, we can potentially discover that malware before anybody really knows about it. So
Yeah. So when you have access to that kind of data, what are some of the things you find activity-wise that are like typically indicative of, oh, there might be a problem here if someone's like looking at this kind of data from a Mac?
yeah, Kat, and when you spoke with her in her podcast, she mentioned launch agents. Like, she had said, if anyone was going to start anywhere, like on Mac OS, like just start looking at some persistence, because over the years there are multiple ways to persist on Mac. There really are quite a handful of ways you could do it. However, attackers, being somewhat new to Mac, kind of stick with just this boring persistence, which is the launch agents and launch daemons. And we've put a lot of focus in here as well, like to launch agents and launch daemons, and trying to determine when a suspicious one is created. So one that we kind of point out even in our talk was there's a ton of files on the operating system. If you just open a Mac and start browsing around and looking at different file names, you'll see a ton of files called com.apple. Whatever it happens to be, whatever software the file is related to. And this is just like a reverse domain name notation that Apple encourages you to kind of name different configuration files. So anything called com.apple is a configuration file for some type of Apple software. And so we masquerading techniques in general, we find pretty easy to pick up on. Attackers masquerading file names using masquerading file extensions. There's if you go through kind of some of the MITRE tags in the masquerading section, you'll notice with behaviors, they're all kind of no-brainers. Like, hey, these are pretty easy to pick up on if it occurs. So one that we look for when file names are created com.apple, and inside their configurations or inside their launch agents, which go on to launch software at startup, the software that they're launching is not signed by Apple. In theory, those two things should never really be true. If you have anything called com.apple, it should be launching software owned by Apple. So we find masquerading techniques like that pretty easy to pick up on.
So these launch agent files, right? They're like text kind of configuration files that say to the Mac, in my understanding, right, when you boot up, run this thing, right? And there's the name of the file. So that sounds like a pretty easily actionable tip for a lot of people that might want to try their first hand at catching Mac persistence. If you're looking at launch agents, right? And I looked at mine actually before we talked here because I'd run into that. I was like, oh, that's a good idea, right? I should check some of these things out. Giant list, right, of things. It's like com Apple whatever. The implication there being like those things should have been Apple. Like the idea is if it's called com Apple, Apple made that program, and there shouldn't be exceptions to that rule.
Yeah, you will find some exceptions every now and then, but for the most part, Apple noticed that attackers were doing this. Right, this is actually one of the reasons that system integrity protection exists on Mac, or rootless, as a lot of people call it. Right, if you try to go to the root of your hard drive and create a file, even as root, you can't do it. It's not a thing. And that's because of the security implementation in place that is system integrity protection. So Apple's basically taken the core of the operating system and they've protected it by SIP. So, and then they took all those launch agents and daemons called com.apple, and they moved it to those protected directories. A lot of attackers don't even realize this. So they continue to call their daemons and agents com.apple something, even though inside those folders, from a security perspective, they stick out like a sore thumb, because the majority of all those items have been moved to protected directories that users can't modify, they can't delete, and they can't create anything in those directories either. So,
is that the whole system folder at the root of the hard drive?
Yes, it's more than just a system folder. Okay. But it is Yes, it's the same concept. There are parts of the hard drive that you cannot make any additions or subtractions from. Yeah.
If you've been with us through season 1 and 2, you've undoubtedly heard me talk about some of the courses that I've authored for SANS that are near and dear to my heart as a lifelong Blue Teamer. What you may not know is that every year and multiple times per year, these courses continue to get better. One of my favorite classes to teach is Sec 450 Blue Team Fundamentals, which is a technical class I designed for anyone working as a cybersecurity analyst for teams large or small. We've continued to update the class and bring in new information on the newest threats, data, and protocols that any defender needs to be aware of. In the most recent course refresh that went live just about a month ago, I've continued to hone the content, diving further into cloud defense, automation examples, detection for modern attacks and attackers, including common things like ransomware and much more. And we've also brought increased focus on new and more difficult to monitor network protocols like HTTP2 and HTTP3, DNS over HTTPS, and TLS 1.3, things that every Blue Team needs to be familiar with or will need to be very soon. Every version of this class comes with continued focus and updates, and this class is huge. I don't know of any other security operations course out there that contains nearly 1,000 pages of slides and notes, 15 hands-on labs with a virtual machine to go with them, including another 400 pages of step-by-step exercises for those hands-on exercises, video walkthroughs of all of those exercises, MP3s, a course wiki, and a whole day CTF where you can apply the skills you've learned in class throughout the week. My goal with this class is to bring you the absolute most comprehensive security operations and analysis course possible, and I'm continuing to strive with every release to keep updating the course and deliver on that mission. The depth of content in this course is something that SANS is uniquely positioned to deliver, and I hope you'll check it out if you have a free moment. Go to sans.org/sec450 to check out the free course demo, which is a free full section of the course, and an in-depth syllabus to see if it's right for you. We have options to take it live in person, live online, or at your own pace with SANS On Demand. And unlike some other training courses, SANS and I are there to help you along the way with personalized help and explanations for any questions you may have. With the recent release of the GIAC GSOC certification, anyone that takes the class can now get the corresponding certificate that shows that you've put in the work and have what it takes to go head-to-head with modern attackers. I really think we put together something special here, and I hope you check it out. Thanks for listening, and now on with the show. So that might be analogous to like someone in Windows running, the auto runs tool from sysinternals or whatever, right? It's supposed to be that definitive list of like, here's what's going on. So you can kind of check through those and read programs and kind of see if they're, signed by Apple, as you said, or not. That brings up the question in my mind of, well, okay, so let's say there's a malicious program that's on the hard drive and it's not signed by Apple and it's malware. Apple has some other mechanisms that are kind of built into the operating system that, in theory, should be able to stop some of those things. Can you describe like kind of what approach they take in terms of some of those other features that are out there? And do we have data sources from the security framework that might point out when there's violations against those lists? So that might be analogous to like someone in Windows running the auto runs tool from sysinternals or whatever, right? It's supposed to be that definitive list of like, here's what's going on. So you can kind of check through those and read programs and kind of see if they're signed by Apple, as you said, or not. That brings up the question in my mind of, well, okay, so let's say there's a malicious program that's on the hard drive and it's not signed by Apple and it's malware. Apple has some other mechanisms that are kind of built into the operating system that, in theory, should be able to stop some of those things. Can you describe like kind of what approach they take in terms of some of those other features that are out there? And do we have data sources from the security framework that might point out when there's violations against those lists?
Yeah, so Apple has a number of built-in security features. Probably the most well known is Gatekeeper and File Quarantine. Right, this is the big annoying pop-up you get when when you try to run software that you just downloaded and it's like, hey, you just downloaded this from the internet. Are you sure it's safe? Like, it's just a simple question, but it does get you to stop and kind of think, right? That's File Quarantine. If you try to do that same exact thing with something that's unsigned or not signed by a trusted developer, you get instead a pop-up that says, you can't run this. Like, we won't allow it, right? And actually, to get it to run, you right click and then click open. Like, it's a very simple workaround, but it's still, you have to be intentional about the fact that you're trying to open it, right? So those are kind of two of the popular, like, well known because they're more in your face security features. And then we have a few other things. So there's XProtect, which is on Apple. It's all it's not really any type of secret at this point. That is basically built on Yara rules that Apple kind of manages. MRT, which I think over time we're slowly starting to kind of see this. It stands for malware removal tool. I think it and XProtect probably become one, but they're there to operate in the background, scan for known malware, and remove it, like, and not allow you to run it, like should Apple find anything. And then one of the last major ones that a lot of people, could familiarize themselves with would be TCC, transparency, consent, and controls. I think basically when you go into when you open an app that wants to open the webcam, you now have to explicitly approve that app to open the webcam, right? Like before I got in this podcast, I had to approve Google Chrome to allow access to the camera as well as the microphone, right? So that I can be talking to you right now. That's kind of the last one. Is now that Apple is now kind of getting these apps in front of you that are doing these not shady things, like we have all kinds of productivity software now that needs access to these types of things. But if you didn't know that it was happening, that might be kind of weird. And Apple puts that in front of you now to let you make that decision.
Yeah. So the XProtect thing you had mentioned, right? List of Yara signatures that Apple is developing. Is that something that I don't know if this is a silly question or not, but like, do they just have those sitting somewhere on the hard drive and you can go like look at their library of what they're trying to detect, or are they like obscuring that away from users?
Yeah, I think over time, so it is, and you can read a number of different blogs from big security vendors that tell you where to go look for that stuff. But I don't know if that'll be how it is forever. That is kind of how it works right now. Apple no longer like labels the malware to where it makes sense to human eyes. It's probably labeled a little bit different. So you can't tell exactly what you're looking at in terms of what rules correlate to which malware per se. Gotcha. But yeah, right now you are able to view those rules somewhere, which is pretty public knowledge if you Google about.
Gotcha. Is that something that you can add your own custom rules to, or is that completely like off limits to users? Like, can you write your own custom antivirus, I guess, signature?
I actually don't remember the answer to this. I don't think that file is SIP protected, but I can't overly remember. I know a while back, before I was at Jamf, we ran a small startup called Digita Security, which wrote a tool called UX Protect, and it kind of allowed this visibility into Yara on the system. It's an unmanaged tool, hasn't really been updated in a long time. But we were using some kind of cool ways to use that Yara engine that's built in. So
yeah, interesting. The other thing I was thinking of was kind of the notarization piece, as Apple calls it, in terms of looking at whether something is legitimate or not. Yeah. So yeah, you mentioned the signing thing, right? And in theory, tell me if I'm right about this, right? As I understand it, if you want to write something and not distribute it through the App Store, you're asking them, hey, this is the app I'm going to be distributing. Can you please at least sign it so that ideally Gatekeeper doesn't get in the way? Is that how that works?
Well, yeah. So the way it works is you, as a developer, you go and you buy a signing certificate from Apple. Like you saying, I want to be an Apple developer. You go pay your $99 to the to Apple, and they give you this certificate that now lets you, when you develop something, you set up your Xcode or whatever your build workflow is, so that you are now signing that with this certificate Apple gives you. Mine, for instance, is attached to my name. Like, if you go to any binary that I've written and you look at the code signing information, you see Jaron Bradley right there with my own unique like team identifier, that type of thing. So you, as the developer, sign the sign the code that you write. If Apple ever in the future determines that you've written something malicious and you're no longer to be trusted, they revoke that team ID, and now everything you've ever written will no longer run on any Apple computers because your signature information has been revoked. So the notarization portion that you're referring to is actually slightly different. So now, I forget starting with which exact release, but now on top of signing and making sure everything's properly signed, you also have to kind of build your product, and in some way that product gets uploaded to Apple, not in its raw source code form or anything, but Apple has some built-in scans. Presumably, nobody really knows what happens on the Apple side after you upload, but something comes back and says, okay, you're good, or this didn't pass notarization. So sometimes it's like, you should have these security checks enabled in your app and you don't, or you should have, these, whatever features it be. Apple can come back with a number of things saying this app either isn't safe or isn't trusted. And that is the notarization process. So if you don't pass that notarization process, your app is once again going to get caught by some type of gatekeeper. And if some type of gatekeeper feature, and when users try to open that app, they'll be presented with prompts instead of like a nicely flowing app that should just open, right? So that's another check that's been built on top of the app development process. Yeah.
Gotcha. So you had mentioned before, like right-clicking and hitting open. If something is completely unsigned, does that get around that, or does it still have to be a signed application to run at all?
It does. That will get around all the gatekeeper checks, and I think there's some changes coming to macOS Ventura that maybe will change that. I can't quite remember what's all coming in some of those updates, but at least up till now, and all you had to do was right click and it would essentially bypass those. I shouldn't say I should more say override, right? Like you're intentionally doing it. You would override those checks and basically be saying like, I'm going to do this. Like I'm doing this intentionally. Stop trying to block me. What's really interesting about that is that malware authors have discovered this also. So now, for example, the Schleyer dropper, it's a example I speak to very frequently because they're very adamant about running on Mac systems. The Schleyer dropper usually comes up through like some type of flash pop-up. Maybe you're trying to watch, some free match of something. You're trying to watch some movie that's only out in theaters. So you go to some website to watch it and you get something that says, hey, you got to download Flash to watch this. Like, it's so sad that this still works, but we see it so often. The user downloads quote unquote Flash, which has been dead for, how long now. And then they open that. And what this generally does from Schleier's perspective, and what they've done in the past as well as I think they're still doing this, it mounts a DMG onto the system. You get a mounted drive, which then shows you what looks like some type of installer. It's actually just an application with an installer icon on it. Pretty standard masquerading technique. But the instructions, it's completely unsigned, and the instructions in this DMG like installer like fakiness, the instructions they provide say, hey, to run this installer, just right click it and click open. They literally provide you the override options inside of the DMG, where you can kind of put fancy graphics and provide those types of things. So it's just kind of, it's funny that even attackers have realized this, how easy it kind of is to do this override. I don't know if Apple's going to change that in the future. Maybe we'll see something more difficult to kind of do this override thing. But even attackers are like, well, we could probably get people to follow a right click prompt, right? So right. That is kind of an interesting factor.
Yeah, I'm glad you went there, because that was going to be my next question, is like, if all these things are in place, right, our attackers saying, okay, well, we're not going to get our malware assigned because it'll just get revoked. So like, are they falling back to another format? But it sounds like, no, they're just saying, hey, just override it. And here's how you override it. Very much like the click enable content, like in a macro, right? It's the same kind of thing, right?
Yeah. It's a similar concept. And that is also to say, like, some malware developers are literally just signing, like it's a $99 certificate. It gets revoked. Fine. I'll buy a new certificate, right? You probably need some information. I forget what you have to provide to Apple to get that certificate, but we see adware constantly coming up with new team IDs and new signatures. Like they get caught, well, sign it with a new one next time. So like it's not a flawless approach, but it does allow Apple to kind of say like, hey, this developer is not trusted. Just don't ever allow anything signed by this person. So it's not like it's wasted time, but some attackers will just, I'm going to sign this malware and it's going to run until I get caught. That can be the approach. So
and then they get another one and just kind of rinse and repeat. Is there like a lot of script-based malware? Because like in Windows, right, you can do nearly the same stuff with like PowerShell and never actually even hit execution prevention tools and stuff like that. Does that kind of equivalent exist in macOS?
Yeah, definitely. I think this is something Apple's noticed as well. That and maybe to some extent, that's why we're seeing these interpreter languages that have always been guaranteed to be there on Mac kind of disappearing. Right, Python no longer built in. You got to install Xcode on a new Mac to get that Python interpreter. PHP got the boot. I don't know. People still using PHP on Macs like to script stuff out. I don't know, but these are kind of disappearing. I would argue that a lot of security. A lot of security pen testing tools and a lot of even malware in the wild was coming through in Python. And now that Python isn't there, maybe we'll stop seeing that. Now that it's not a guarantee to be on the system, maybe we'll see a little bit less of that. But you're always like, I don't know how you get rid of a shell, right? You're always going to have bash. You're always going to have your different shell interpreters. But I will say you can do a lot of stuff in Python that would take a lot of work to do in just a standard like shell sometimes, depending on how crafty you're trying to get, right? One interesting factor, AppleScript, right? AppleScript is on Macs and has a ton of capabilities. I've never been into AppleScript. It's a little too weird for me, like the way it's typed out and like trying to type like human language, but still getting errors if you type wrong. Like it's just, I don't love AppleScript. However, XCS set malware, which I think is also called DoppelSpy. It has a few different names, but it is written entirely in AppleScript, and it has, at this point, to my knowledge, used 3 different 0 days built like from AppleScript, or like calls those 0 days or those exploits, called them rather. They're patched, but called them through like different AppleScript malware and different AppleScript pieces that it kind of stitches together based on the computer it hits and which modules it wants to run. So. That's another factor. That's kind of I don't know if you'd call that your PowerShell equivalent, what you want to call that from the Windows world, but you can do a lot with AppleScript, and I think that's been proven by a few different really cool AppleScript maybe projects and different malware pieces. But I guess all that to say, like scripting is for sure something that malware comes through on macOS.
So let's say you're a team with Jamf or any other kind of tool like it that's monitoring the stuff that is happening on your enterprise full of systems, right? And you want to catch both script-based malware and Mako executable style malware files. Is it as simple as looking at all the things that have executed and saying, where is there an anomaly here? Where is something that's unsigned? Where is there a script that has questionable parameters? Is there any kind of like succinct, easy, like look for this when we're talking about finding these bits of malware, given the kind of logging that you would get with a tool like that?
Yeah, sometimes. I think you'll find a similar answer that you'd find in the Windows world, right? Like you're looking for, sometimes it's as easy as looking for a process with this name where the command line arguments contain this string, right? Like maybe you're looking for PowerShell on Windows, where you have like one of the rare interesting strings that you might run with PowerShell. On Mac, it's the same thing. Like, and maybe I'm looking for AppleScript running, for example, and I'm looking for AppleScript running when it's an interactive session, or when AppleScript invokes. AppleScript also has the ability to run JavaScript, I should say OSA script, which is the interpreter, can run JXA, JavaScript for automation, which rarely done by any software or users, but it's been discovered to be pretty useful from an attacker perspective. So maybe I'm looking for anomalies like that, where attackers have figured out kind of this technology, but users have not. So let's scope in on that. Let's see how often that's happening, and when it does happen, let's look at the big picture and see how interesting it is, right? So sometimes it is as easy as looking for a specific file create with a certain name, or looking for a process create with a certain argument. But I think where you find a lot of value is where you're able to kind of find something like that, and then say expand on, okay, what else happened under that process? What happened under that process tree? Is the parent of AppleScript the terminal? Because if it is, that means somebody's logged into the GUI because they're using a GUI application. Is the parent of that process SSH? That's a little more strange, like JXA Apple's or OSA script running under an SSH session. Like, now we're getting to some interesting stuff, especially once you get the context of what user system are you on? Are you on an accountant's computer? Because like, stuff's not adding up now. Are you on a developer's computer or a test machine? Maybe it makes a little more sense, but it's really about finding that one interesting event, and then being able to pull up the right details to kind of expand and get the context of what happened on that system, or in that session at least.
Yeah, so a lot of the similar mindset, right? What's doing what's actually running? Have you seen any other place? The things that are questionable. So yeah, just kind of learning where those new data sources are, what they look like, as opposed to Windows, and maybe still applying that same mindset seems like the path to success there.
It is, and one of the things I've pitched over the years in terms of where does this get more complex. It's a couple different spaces on Mac OS. It's the fact that it's less documented. There's fewer people talking about what's weird stuff really look like, right? Even though, like I kind of hinted at, like the steps you take on a Mac are very similar to the steps you take on Windows. You're just doing it a little bit differently. And then from a threat hunter perspective, a lot of the initial design concept of Mac OS, that kind of concept I spoke to earlier, a lot of different daemons communicating over IPC, like a lot of different daemons communicating over IPC, makes the threat hunting process, especially when it comes to analyzing process trees, a little bit more tricky. The parent of everything nearly ends up being parent process ID 1, which is launch D. If I open something, if I run the open command and point it to an application from a terminal, that sends a message to launch D, and that application gets opened from launch D. At startup, when every process gets started, it's the launch D process that's doing it, right? So we end up with these very linear process trees, unless you know kind of how to pivot about the system and get a little more context into how to build out these process trees. And that's something that more should be on security vendors to be helping you with, right? Like providing the right details to do those types of pivots, and it should still be on you to kind of learn the operating system a bit, right? But learning how to look past just or get around some of the linear process tree information and expand into other details to figure out the context of a certain action is where a lot of, I think, key threat hunting on Mac OS comes into place.
Gotcha. Yeah. So as you mentioned, right, a lot of this stuff is maybe less documented than what we have in the Windows world. Unfortunately, we're out of time. This hour flew by, jumping into these things with you. So for people who want to follow up on our discussion here and kind of learn maybe where are some of these places that they should be looking, what other tools are out there that might help them understand and interpret this data, where can we find that kind of information, and where can we find all the content that you've put out?
Yeah, definitely. So I have, as mentioned earlier, I do have a book that I kind of wrote when I was initially like trying to document all this stuff and get it in one place. The book is called OSX Incident Response Scripting and Analysis. As you can tell by the title of the book alone, it is a bit outdated. OSX is no longer considered the operating system. It is macOS. So it is a bit dated, and it was written, I think I released it back in about 2016, honestly, right before a bunch of really large changes came security-wise to macOS, of course. And that's how it always works, I'm told, when you're an author. But I did try to document a lot of, at least when it comes to being on the physical system, how to kind of find weird activity like that. And then outside of that, I manage, we of course have a Threat Labs blog at Jamf. When we find some interesting stuff, we always try to get it on there and make it so that people can see what we've been up to. You know, some of the Schlayer stuff I talked about earlier, we've documented that. Some of the 0-day discovery stuff we've found for bypasses, we've documented that. And then just some of the interesting things we find that malware is doing. We document that too. So, and then finally, outside of that, I manage a site called themittenmac.com, where when I get time in my free time, I've tried to document different things that I've discovered in the past, like just being on Macs. I've documented some just like overall intrusion details from talks I've done in the past. And what attackers have actually done on systems, as well as release free security tools, get some of that visibility to the endpoint security framework, some stuff like that. And then finally, threat hunting training that I've started recently offering through that site, and managing that where I can. But that's still kind of, it's where a lot of my time has been going lately in my free time, which is why there hasn't been a new blog post on there in a while. But we're going to see how that goes, which will be offered both at JNUC conference coming up, which is Jamf Nation 2022, as well as at Objective by the Sea conference, which I guess would be my final mention here. Patrick Wardle, his website, Objective C, that's Objective-SEE. He hosts a ton of Mac content on there. Like, you've probably heard of it. I'm probably not saying anything most Mac users don't know about, but so many different security blogs, malware blogs, and then tooling. He runs a conference. This year it will be out of Barcelona, and I think it's already filled up, unfortunately. But keep an eye out for it, because it is always at a beautiful location, and it is a fun security conference to go to. So I'll be teaching the security training there, as well as doing some talks around some different work we've been doing here at Jamf. So.
All right, fantastic. So tons of resources there for all the listeners. We'll make sure we get those in the show notes. We got conferences, we got books, we got all sorts of online blogs and resources. So awesome stuff, Jaron. We'll wrap it up there. Thank you so much for being on the show, and thanks for all you do for the security community.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.